Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this beautiful day. I'm joined today, of course, by Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, by the Commissioner of Human Rights, Lucero, by the Commissioner of Admin, Robert Davis, and by the Commissioner of Management and Budget, Franz. In a moment, I will have the privilege and the honor to sign our first executive order as Governor of Minnesota, 1901. In Minnesota, we all know that we do better off when we're in it together. Our state must be a leader in ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to thrive. Disparities in Minnesota, including those based on race, geography, economic status, keep our entire state from reaching its full potential. As long as these inequities impact Minnesotans' ability to be successful, we've got more work to do. That's why today I am establishing the One Minnesota Council on Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity. Diversity, inclusion, and equity are core values of mine. They're core values of Minnesota. If we are going to achieve a One Minnesota in everything we do, it will start from this premise. I'll serve as the chair of this council, which will be comprised of commissioners from our cabinet agencies. This council will build on the progress made by a similar council formed by Governor Mark Dayton and will actively work to ensure that all Minnesotans have an opportunity to work for the state of Minnesota, to do business with the state of Minnesota, and have the opportunity to fully participate in the development of policy. The foundational work done by the original council that Governor Dayton put in place focused on those things. It focused on hiring. It focused on inclusion. It focused on procurement. We're going to take that next step of making sure that the lens of equity is used on everything we do, whether it's a transportation project or whether we put out a notice of hiring, of the language that we use and the way that we include people. When we do that, and we've seen this happen in private industry, we know that diversity is not just a goal to reach for some theoretical purpose. Diversity is not only morally the right way to go, it is economically the right way to go because we are stronger together when we build these communities. We have specifically included in this geographic diversity as part of our council's mission because we want to ensure that everyone's voice is heard regardless of zip code. As a former teacher, I know that distance from the capital can seem far. And that's why our One Minnesota Council on Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity will work to actively bring all people to the table. And I would note for those present that you will see a little bit of difference in the official proclamation of this executive order, that it uses language that we all use. Whereas and therefore is not readable by most people. We want people to be included enough that they can pick up an executive order or anything that we put out from this office and understand what it means for them. And so we're very proud in just a moment to sign this. And with that, I'm really proud, still excited, and walking on cloud 9 on this, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan.
Thank you, Governor Walz. I want to thank everyone for joining us today as we announce the One Minnesota Council on Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity. The Council's mission is to provide every Minnesotan with the opportunity to work for our great state, regardless of race, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, socioeconomic status, age, disability, and geography. We know and we want to recognize our Indigenous communities and communities of color that have been historically marginalized and felt unheard. For so long, those communities have been left out of important conversations that have directly impacted them. And while traveling across the state, it is clear many in greater Minnesota also feel like their voice is not being heard. We stand here today with this executive order because we want Minnesotans of all backgrounds to know that we are here to listen. We are here to open the door to everyone, whether you live in the east side of St. Paul or the east side or East Grand Forks. And we want everyone, regardless of race, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, socioeconomic status, age, disability, and geography, to feel seen, heard, and valued in this administration, because everyone deserves to have a seat at the table. Minnesota does really well for some folks, but not all folks. And if we're going to turn the curve on these issues of inequities, we need to make sure that we're putting some teeth behind it. And I can't tell you how excited I am that this is the first executive order to come out of our office. We campaigned that way, and now we want to make sure that we're governing that way. So we're excited that you all are here, and I think now it's time to sign this executive order.
And with that, we do our first official statement at One Minnesota is Real. Everybody's voice matters. This is our opportunity to continue to build on this incredible state's legacy, to have those open conversations on inclusion and equity, making sure that everyone is here before decisions are made, that they're here while we're making them, and that those voices are an integral part of making this great state even better. And with that, we would certainly be glad to answer any questions.
Governor Walz, talk to us about the importance and the prominence of this being your first official act in this room.
I think Lieutenant Governor Flanagan hit on that. That we talked about this a lot, and we all know that campaigns and people come up with campaign themes. It was clear to us that campaign theme came to us by what we were hearing out there, that people were so hungry for this idea of how much better we could be together, how much stronger we could be together. And then I think that hard look that we've all been taking, and this pains me deeply as a public school educator. I am incredibly proud when rankings come out and show Minnesota near the very top. But I have to state that we do a wonderful job with our children if they're white. We don't do as well. And so I think it's incredibly important to me for us to lay the groundwork and to think about and make sure, and I said it, and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan said it a lot on the campaign trail, when we start looking through that lens of inclusion and equity, it's a lens that opens up so many possibilities. It's a lens that is not only so morally right, it's the economics are staring us straight in the face, that 70% of this state's workforce that's already in crisis of shortage is going to come from communities of color or marginalized communities. And so making sure that we're being very deliberate in everything we do, making certainly very deliberate in government. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge the private sector understands that their economic well-being is incumbent on inclusion and equity across the spectrum. And for us to now start adding that, it's foundational. So that when we start working on those themes of education, of healthcare, of community prosperity, they will be tied right back to Executive Order 1901, that those have to be done with inclusion.
You mentioned, Lieutenant Governor, putting teeth into this. What does that mean?
Well, that means, I think, if it's not written down, then it doesn't exist. And so as we have this executive order that is saying, first and foremost, we are looking at issues that face Minnesota through the lens of equity and inclusion, and we're writing it down, we're signing it, and we're making a top priority, the Minnesotans should expect that this is how we're going to govern and how we're going to lead, and that our commissioners are also a part of that process. This is the directive that we've heard from the governor, that equity, inclusion, and diversity are real value of our administration, and we're putting it down. We're making it happen, and we're going to do the work.
The way that, well, if I could, the way that'll manifest itself originally is that I will ask as the diversity that'll be laid out is the goals of what we're looking for, what we're trying to do, the metrics and the ways to measure those, and then the implementation of the best practices as we go forward, so that there's going to be an expectation. And I think it's very clear, certainly to everyone here and Minnesotans, we've acknowledged that we have educational and opportunity and economic gaps, especially for communities of colors. We are well past the point of acknowledging it's a problem and not coming to those concrete solutions. And so the purpose of this is to start providing us with some of those concrete goals, with thinking about it when these commissioners come in. And certainly it makes sense that we have the Commissioner of Management and Budget, we have the Commissioner of Administration, and we have the Human Rights Commissioner here. But they will help be directing this, that these values and the reflection of those metrics and those outcomes will be reflected in Veterans Affairs. It will be reflected in the Department of Agriculture. We have a diverse agricultural community in this state, from Hmong agriculture across to urban agriculture to traditional agriculture that we see out there. Those need to be reflected through this. So I think the teeth that the Lieutenant Governor speaks of, is she's right. We've written it down, and we expect to be held accountable for progress to be made on measurable progress in differences of One Minnesota.
In your experience, when has a council ever solved a problem?
Well, my take on this is that to not start at some point and not to empower people to do it and not to put the governor at the very top of this, the one way that this solves it is we're being very clear about this and laying this out there, that there is an expectation for progress as it does to inclusion. And I'll tell you that everything that I've ever done has been inclusion as part of a team, whatever you're going to call it. The voices that are going to be heard from our folks on human rights or admin or MMB or the community at large that's here, I think that's the only way to do it. So I think most things that I've been involved in, it's that input. I think the frustration has been where people don't feel things have been solved. We're building state parks on lands that Native Americans had that weren't consulted about. Is there something important about that land to you that maybe we should know about before we build this state park? I think it's really, really important if that's part of the early discussion before that happens. So my intention is, in this case, I think in most cases, the best solutions do come out of collaborative efforts. On a case like this of being the first one, I think there's a whole lot of accountability that's standing in this room right now and a whole lot of faces looking at me and saying, if it's more of the same, we're going to know very quickly it's more of the same. If it's not a change, we're going to be speaking out about that. And I think Lieutenant Governor's point is, make it official, make it this council, come together, give us feedback, and then hold the person who needs to be held accountable for that. And that's why I put myself on the council and expect to be there.
When will you set hard quantitative numbers for things like diversity and state employment, procurement, things like that? Is that something you'll do quickly, or?
Yeah, there is a sense of urgency. I certainly can't give you a date on this. One of the things is, of course, in this job was moving right into a session, and some of the things we have, whether it's looking at metrics of accountability and efficiencies across the entire enterprise as it deals with government, or specifics in the case of inclusion. I think what we'll do is start to gather that data as quickly as possible. We'll start to, and again, we are very cognizant that work has already been done. Foundations have already been laid. So we're not reinventing everything. What we're simply doing is expanding and turning what I think this council more outward looking than just inward. And so my expectation is over the next coming months, this council will meet, we'll start grabbing some of those goals. And I don't think that's all that difficult. I think what is difficult, and I'm finding this out even, the way we word job applications, in many cases, depending on where the community's coming from, turns people away from even applying. So our pool of applicants are smaller because we had wording in there or definitions that weren't clear enough. And we want to be really deliberate about that. So as soon as possible, and I think the input that will start to come in is happening already.
How much has the person next to you, Lieutenant Governor, helped explain this to you, explore this? After all, you are a rural white guy, right? Where this emphasis on diversity.
Who speaks Chinese.
Right, but talk to us a little more about where this emphasis came from.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely clear. Well, it's been stated, and I think over the days of getting the feel for what the role of Lieutenant Governor will be, the Lieutenant Governor was very clear in as a top advisor. And I think we've spoken about this often of complementary strengths in an administration. It's very clear that having a woman of color on this ticket was very helpful for me to understand that. I think it's also instructive that a woman of color chose to be on this ticket with a white rural guy because of some of that work, whether it was working in Congress on the China Commission of Uyghur being oppressed in China. Some of those types of things hold near and dear to me. But it's one thing to have that theoretical thought. It's another thing to be, as you say, a white guy in America, has differences and has some of that inherent privilege that comes with it. It's really important to see that through that lens of a different perspective. So in answer to your question, absolutely foundational, but I think it's also a manifestation of how I've gone about doing things in my life, of gathering those people around me and listening to those diverse voices that would give me that better worldview, that better perspective. But I certainly am grateful for the Lieutenant Governor's counsel, and I think that runs both ways. And again, this issue of geographic inclusion and diversity is to explain sometimes how rural communities feel, how they feel like they're left out of this perspective when it seems all too easy to say, well, they know how the system works, they should be there. And so it's certainly a team effort, but I do give great credit, I think, for thinking deeper, thinking more concretely about the solutions, because this is a part that again, the contradictions of being incredibly proud that Minnesota is able and big enough to talk about our gaps and our problems with racial disparities, incarceration, school achievement, but now taking it to the next level and say the expectations for results are higher than they've ever been.
Folks, we have time for just one more question here, and then I want to make sure we get the group of interns in the back to come up and get a photo with you.
What's the timetable for the work? This talks about a report to the legislature. When are all those things going to be?
Yeah, and I think this is in the quick formation to get us going. I am finding, again, to try and be, some of you noticed this, I had been in office on Monday for 3 hours and being criticized that I hadn't made decisions already on major issues. That's not a cop-out of pushing things down. It's that trying to get a feel for kind of how we order things and the priorities. I think it's very clear by standing here in front of you in what is basically the first official act of this administration, and to put this out there, as the Lieutenant Governor said, on paper to the world that we're going to do this. I think the expectation would be is that you need to see some results on this, some of those goal-setting metrics and then best practices implemented sooner rather than later. And I think, again, we've got we can multitask, we can walk and chew gum, but I think Commissioner Franz would say February 19th is a pretty important date around here with the submission of our first budget, and we'll be trying to work simultaneously. But again, it's a really good question in this, and I think what we're going to try and do is truly start to work simultaneously with this. That budget document better be reflected through Executive Order 1901 in terms of how it's put together, because that is not just a fiscal document that we are putting together, it's a moral document that will be reflected. So I think you're going to start to see this work simultaneously. Thank you all for joining us today, and if the interns wanted to come up, we would certainly be honored to have you here. So thank you.
Well, in the last 2 years, we've had over 22 judges ratify into law violations of the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, removing vital records from the courthouse, and as a result, stealing more than over $33 billion out of black communities on the Aunt Jemima royalties. Also, this former administration being complicit in espionage for extortion of Terminator Matrix litigation royalties in that case. I'm here to place you on notice that I'm demanding the arrest of Lori Swanson, Jonathan Mueller, and those that were in their administration that were complicit in engaging in espionage and racketeering and organized extortion over a period of 5 years, in this former administration not doing anything about it. You know, we've been, my colleague, she's been in court for the last 4 years and nothing has been done about it. The U.S. Senate has been quiet on it. We've been blocked from appearing in the U.S. Senate to speak, along with Tom Fenton and other people that have talked about money laundering proceeds of extortion through the William J. Clinton Foundation. We want something done about this. It's not right for our royalties to be stolen and money laundered through the William J. Clinton Foundation.
I'll make sure I get my staff to get the data from you, and then make sure that you have the process on how we set up a meeting with the proper people in our administration. But thank you for that. If the interns would come up, thank you.